Some pro teams call it public relations, some call it media relations, or just communications. In college, they like the term sports information department. Whatever the title, the purpose is to maintain stats and records and act as liaison between the media and the players and the coaches. The NBA's Orlando Magic call it their communications department, and its senior director is George Galante. An internship while still a college student started him on a tenure with that organization that now approaches its third decade. The life of an NBA PR guy on Media Credentials.
I demand satisfaction.
My name is Whit Watson, and this is Media Credentials. I'm a sports announcer who's worked a lot of places. This podcast will peel back the layers of sports media and show you how the sausage gets made. Through interviews with industry pros and my own experience, you'll understand why you're seeing what you're seeing and who's responsible for it. Your media credentials have been approved. As the Senior Director of Communications for the Orlando Magic, George Galante is a managing editor for the team's media guides. He contributes to nightly game notes. He coordinates interview requests for players and coaches, maintains stat information, and often travels with the team. As he puts it, his department is a gatekeeper between the NBA franchise and the media. In this episode, we talked about how the NBA has changed, how the Magic have gotten better, and his career path, which includes a foray into minor league hockey. First, let's set the stage. You'll hear references to the RDV organization that stands for Rich DeVos, the co-founder of Amway, who owned the Orlando Magic from 1991 until he passed in 2018. The DeVos family still owns the team now. George mentions Jeff, John, and Jamal in the basketball operations department. Jeff Weltman is the president of basketball operations. John Hammond is the general manager of the Magic, and Jamal Mosley is the team's head coach. The Magic have had only one winning season in the last 11 years, but last year they did win 12 more games than they did the previous season, which George was quick to tell me was the biggest jump in the Eastern Conference, and that was after losing 20 of their first 25 games. I'll let George tell it. So, George, tell me how a kid from Staten Island ends up spending half of his life in Central Florida.
Well, it's more than half now, which is crazy. Well, my parents, we like everybody else, Whit, I think on the planet, we vacationed in Daytona Beach and Orlando, Disney World. We did that a couple of times. And then I was 13 or 14 because it was the mid to late 80s. And my mom and dad said, we're moving, like we're going to go move to Florida. And that's where I've been ever since. I've never left.
So did you finish high school somewhere in Orlando?
I did. No, I went to Spruce Creek High School, which is in Port Orange, which is right outside of Daytona Beach. And then from there I went to Stetson, where I got my bachelor's degree, and then right to the RDV organization.
So Stetson is where it all started for you in terms of the job you have now. What drew you to your current profession?
I mean, when I got to school, I was like a lot of kids. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I really didn't. I went in undecided. I knew I liked sports. And I knew, but despite my physical stature, Whit, right, I played 2 years of varsity basketball at Spruce Creek. I've always been a sports nut. I was one of those kind of geeky kids too that kept score of the baseball game on with the scorebook while I was watching a game, and I like listening to the radio broadcast as opposed to TV sometimes. And I knew I was into sports, and I liked kids. I did a lot of camp counseling when I was in high school and college, and I thought, if I could teach and coach basketball, I would be good. And so I started out actually trying to get my teaching degree, and then my work study was in the athletic department. I had no idea what sports information was. I had no idea that it was even a thing. And so my sophomore year at Stetson, I got assigned to the sports information department. And I was doing whatever tasks they gave me. I really didn't think too much of it. My boss there, who was Tom McClellan, who was the SID at the time and who's now at East Carolina, he's been there forever. He kept giving me tasks to do, and I would just do them and not really think much about them. And after a while, I noticed that my workload started getting heavier and heavier. But I also, like I said, it didn't really bother me because it was fun. I liked to do it. I was a decent writer. And he finally pulled me into his office one day and he said, George, have you ever thought about doing this for a career? And I said to him, I go, doing what? He laughed and he goes, well, you don't think I do this for free, right? Like this is my job. And you could be really good at it. We could get you down the right path and start learning how to do a couple of things. And I said to him, I go, yeah, if I could do this, I mean, this is just fun for me. Like, this is unbelievable. I didn't even know it was a job. And so he kind of took me under his wing, and Tom Snyder was the assistant there. And they let me do just so many things that I don't know if it was because I was at a small school like Stetson, but they let me take a sport. I mean, I had women's cross country was my sport when I was a junior. And then I would go to the baseball games and do all kinds of stuff.
As a student,
yeah.
You're managing the sports information for a varsity program.
Yeah. And again, it was really naive because I didn't really think much of it. I was having fun. It was easy. Things were coming fairly easy for me.
Well, that's an incredible opportunity is what I'm saying. Is like that they trusted an undergraduate. They trusted a kid to do the sports information management for one of their varsity programs. They're putting a lot of confidence in you.
Yeah. And thinking back on it now, it's like, yeah, like, would I be willing to give a 18, 19-year-old kid a sport, like no matter what the sport was? Probably not. Like I don't even want to give my intern now things to do because I'm afraid. No. And so they put a lot of confidence in me. They let me grow and they let me just kind of stretch my wings a little bit and get more and more and do more and more things for, even our more important sports not to say that the other sports are not important, but, the higher profile sports at Stetson at the time were basketball and baseball specifically. And so I got to do more things when it came to those two things. And then I actually, I don't know how much it played a part, but the Magic actually had training camp at Stetson in 1993 when I was a sophomore. And that's where I actually, and he probably doesn't even remember, I met Alex Martins there and a couple of members of his staff that are no longer there. And I introduced myself and I tried to just be as willing and able to do things that they needed and just meet different people along the way as I was getting to do more things. And so everybody told me at that point, when I had decided that, listen, like this is where I wanted to go. My parents were not very happy at the time either, by the way. But they said, well, like you have to do an internship in order to get anywhere in this industry. You're going to have to do an internship. I said, okay. Right. And so this was at a time pre-emails where you had to physically mail off resumes in the letter. I had to go to the mailbox. I had to type up 60. And I remember typing out my resume for an internship going into my senior year of school for every Major League Baseball team and the league office and every NBA team and the league office. And just and then you're sitting by the mailbox at that point waiting, right? Because there's no email. I know it's hard for some people to understand that may be listening to this, and I remember getting all of these, I got many, many no's back. I mean, just form letters back. Thanks for your letter. No, thanks. I did luckily get 3 or 4 yeses back for interviews. And one of them happened to be for the Magic. And I've been there ever since, which is crazy to think about.
And for those who don't know, Alex Martins is now the CEO of the Orlando Magic. He was originally the team's first PR guy, right? Wasn't that his first job?
Yeah, he was the head. When I was an intern, he was in charge of the PR department. Yep.
Go back for a second to the sports information department at a school like Stetson, which is not a very big school for those who don't know, in Central Florida, DeLand, lovely little village north of Orlando. What does the SID do? Give me a 30-second job description.
Well, I mean, the SID is in charge of all of the historical data, for one, the statistics, everything to do with that. And then they're also coordinating any interviews that may come their way with the players, with the coaches, with the administration. They're the SID department and the PR department. I like to call them like the gatekeeper between the organization and the outside world, right? Anybody that wants to have an interview or gain access to the team, most of the time has to go through the SID or the PR department.
You said that you were the kid that would keep score while watching a baseball game, and I used to do the same thing. Does the research aspect of it, is that attractive to you? Do you enjoy kind of burying your head in the notes and the numbers?
I do. I like to find little nuggets that maybe nobody else would find. I'm definitely that. I remember when I was first describing what I did to my kids when they were smaller, I would say, like, if you were watching a broadcast and a broadcaster said, well, the last time the Magic scored, 128 points was back on, November 13th, 1997. Like those were the little things that I would really like to dig up. And I still do. Luckily, there are a lot more resources that I can use now as opposed to a binder of game box scores. There's so many references you can find on the internet. And I have a lot of people around me too that are better than me at doing that. Especially even David Steele, who's our play-by-play announcer, who very well. Like, he's excellent at digging up just these nuggets that you just never would know were there. But yeah, that's very, very cool for me.
It is, and there's definitely an audience out there that's not going to believe that you and I both graduated from college without internet.
Right.
And there was no email, there was no internet, and you had to do these jobs on paper, basically. Yeah. And I wonder how much your position has changed in the 20 plus years you've been doing it, because there's so much more information available online and it's so easily accessible. Has that made your job easier, harder, or just different?
I would say easier and different. And easier, just like you would have to sit. I mean, you've seen pictures of some of these old. I have this picture in my head. Harvey Pollack was a guy.
Yeah.
Right. Sure. He was with the Philadelphia 76ers for forever. I mean, until he passed away, he was doing SID and statistic work for the Sixers and the league. And I remember seeing a picture of him from some article where he is literally. You ever see the show Hoarders Wit?
Oh yeah,
right. It looks like it looks like an episode of Hoarders, where he is surrounded by loose leaf binders and folders, and newspapers, and that is how he did his job in the 70s and 80s and even into the early 90s. That he's just surrounded by all of these papers, which is crazy. And there was a point where early on, like you kind of turn in your office and you look, and I always turn to somebody next to me. I'm like, I don't want to be Harvey. Like I can't do what Harvey did. So it's so much easier now, where if I want to look up something, like Basketball Reference, for example, is a site that everybody uses now in our industry for anything that they want to find. You can find that so quick. And so painless, because they've made it easy for you. So it's such a convenience to have and that's just one of the 25 tools that are out there that you can find these things. It's so much easier, and you can dig deeper too. Like in the past, maybe you could only go to such a level where only my final box score would be accessible. Now I can go into specific quarters. I can go into times of quarters. I can really. I think Ty Eastham, our TV producer, gets on me sometimes because I'll send him something and he's just like, George, that's crap. Like nobody cares about. Nobody cares who scored the first basket of the second quarter. Things like that, where you can really get like crazy specific with it now.
One of my podcast guests was Tracy Veal, who is in charge of credentialing for the PGA Tour. Okay. And a topic that she brought up was, how do you decide what is a legitimate media enterprise and what isn't? Like a blog or a podcaster who wants a credential to a Magic game. And because there's so much more of that now than there was even 5 years ago, how tough of a job is that for you guys in your department to decide okay, this is a legitimate media member and this isn't?
That is really hard. And that is definitely a situation that we deal with daily now. Because like you said, I mean, everybody and their brother can have a podcast out of their basement. Everybody and their brother can have a video thing on YouTube that makes them a member of everybody with a phone now basically can be a member of the media. Like they just can. You have the ability. I mean, we talked about it actually before you started recording, right? I have a light kit in here. I got this fancy microphone that I don't know. I didn't know anything about podcasting or whatever until we started doing it. And now I have all this equipment that makes me, if I really wanted to, look pretty professional. And so it's hard. I mean, we do a couple of things at the Magic that I'd like to think we were one of the first ones to kind of open up to bloggers and podcasters and embracing a new media a little bit. I can just give you an example. This is, I mean, Dwight was with us. So that was, let's say it was 15 years ago. Okay. Mm-hmm. We had a reporter that he was a blogger and he wanted media credentials. And for the longest time we denied, because we didn't even know what it was, right? Like it's just this guy typing out words about the mat. So he was adamant about, I mean, he was very persistent. And so we kind of made an arrangement with him. Like, listen, if you want media credentials and you want us to take you seriously, you have to start coming to practices, cover practice, not just come, because there's a lot of guys out there that, and this has been for years because I mean, heck, I did it when I was a kid. Like you just want to go to the game.
Sure.
You don't really care about covering the event. You just want to go to the game and you want to go to the game for free. And so, we made this guy come to practice and cover, quote unquote, cover practices. He did everything we asked. He was there. I mean, he was there. I don't know if he had a job outside. I mean, I don't know what he was doing to make money, but he was there every day. He would cover practice every day. And so finally that we gave him a season pass after that because he proved to us that he was serious about it and wanted to be treated like a regular media person. And so that was like one of the first ones I remember doing where we had to kind of embrace a blogger. But then you realize that like, he's not the only blog out there. There's this blog, there's that blog, there's so many blogs and podcasts. And so it's definitely, you have to run them kind of through a process where you have somebody on your staff or multiple people on your staff look through their website, look through their podcasts, listen to a couple of them, see how negative or positive they are, because I don't necessarily want a guy that's just going to come in and just start bashing the Magic either. That doesn't do us any good because he could do that from his couch like he's doing now. So it's definitely a process, but we are very well aware that media is changing, and you have to start looking at some of the blogs and podcasts and everything out there as very legitimate sources of media, because that's how people digest these things now. They don't necessarily, it's not like when I was a kid and I went to the driveway, got my paper, opened up the box scores and read the articles and the box scores. That's just not how people consume things now. And us as the media relations or communications department, like we have to adapt.
So coming back to the career path, you did an internship, as most of us did in the industry, that led to a full-time position with the Magic organization. And there was also a period of time when the ownership group owned a minor league hockey team in Orlando, the International Hockey League's Orlando Solar Bears, the first iteration of the Solar Bears. And you were a hockey public relations guy in addition to whatever basketball duties you had. How was that period of your career?
That was awesome. I mean, that was at a time, and you were there. We had just gone to the finals in 1995 with Shaq and Penny and that whole group. And the organization was booming. Like there just seemed to be, I mean, you were full-time at the time, I believe, or at least part-time. I was
just gotten hired. Yeah.
Right. I thought, you were like 1 year in and I was an intern. Right. But the trick was, and so like the organization was booming, right? There was jobs. It seemed to be for every department, both basketball and like you said, we had this hockey team coming on board. And there were just jobs everywhere. And I remember every intern in the organization was applying for literally every job, whether they had that background or not. I didn't want to work in the box office, right? I didn't want to work in community relations. My passion and my focus was PR. So the only jobs that I applied for, there actually happened to be 2 jobs at the time. One was with the Magic side of things, and then one was with the Solar Bears. And I applied for both jobs, and I ended up being a finalist for the Magic job. It came down to me and someone else who actually ended up getting the job at that point. And Alex had pulled me into his office and he said, George, listen, like, we really like you. We think you have a lot of potential. We think you're going to really do some things in this business. But this was the person that they gave the job to. He was an intern prior to me. And they had basically, I don't want to say promised him that if something opened up that he'd be the first call they make, but that's basically what, and it was the right, probably the right decision for both of us. I still had not had my degree at that point when I was an intern. I didn't know that you were supposed to take your internships after you graduated. That's where most, I was the only intern there, I believe, that had gone after my junior year. And so I still had 9 credit hours of schooling to get in order to get my degree. And so they had said, we want to keep you on, and here's what we're going to do. We'd like you to take the Solar Bears coordinator job, because they had already hired someone to be the manager. And with the caveat of you need to go and finish your degree.
You have to graduate, right? I
had to graduate. And so that was what I did my first year. Like I said, I still had 9 hours to get. The organization was awesome. I mean, they really worked with me and they understood my situation. I was 21, I think, at the time, or 22. I mean, either way, I was pretty young. I was living in Orlando. I would drive to Stetson every morning because I would have an 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock was the earliest class I could get. Finish class, I would drive straight to work, where I would probably roll in a little bit before 10, only because Stetson, was probably 45 minutes away from downtown. I would work a full day into the night, or if we had a game, obviously you're working way into the night. And then I would get up the next morning and I would do the same thing. And I did that for my whole first year at the Solar Bears. And it was great. It was the crazy thing with that was the boss that I had, he ended up taking a job. This was 3 months into the job, right? So I'm only on the job for 3 months. And like I said, I'm going to class every day and then driving to work. I would say 3 months in, he pulls me aside and he says, listen, I have this opportunity to go to the Toronto Raptors. The Raptors were just starting up. And he said, I'm going. Like, I'm leaving, and don't worry, they'll take care of you. We'll find somebody to help oversee things, and everything will be fine. And I just kind of looked at him. I was like, holy crap, like this is going to be hard. So for the first month or so, I was by myself. And I remember Don Waddell, who was our GM at the time, who's now the GM with the Carolina Hurricanes. He called me into his office and he said, George, listen, you're doing a great job. We're looking for somebody to oversee things and oversee you. He's like, just keep plugging away. Everything's going to be fine. Just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great. I said, okay, no problem. 2 months later, pulls me into his office again. George, we're still looking. Everything, we're going to take care of it. Everything's going to be fine. Just keep doing what you're doing. I looked at him. I said, okay. Well, the next thing you know, the season was pretty much over. They had not hired anybody over me. And they basically then at the last, just at the end of the season, had basically called me in and said, George, I think we're going to, you've done such a good job. We're going to leave you as the head of the department, and we'll find somebody just to kind of be your assistant. And then we'll just proceed from there. I was like, okay, sounds good. And so, but when you're looking back at the time, it was just crazy because, like I said, I was 21, 22. I had never really done it. This is my first job. This is my first real job.
Right.
And I'm just scrambling. I got to do at the time when you got the news that, like, okay, I wasn't going to get this Magic job, but I was going to get the hockey job. Like, obviously I was a little disappointed at the time because with that, we were on such a high with the Magic at that point. We were in the finals. We thought we're going to the finals every year. It's Shaquille O'Neal. It's the NBA. Like it's the pinnacle for me where I was. And then to go to minor league hockey, it was like, well, all right, I'm not, completely satisfied, but it'll work. But looking back, like those 4 years, it was such a blessing that I didn't get the Magic job initially and got this hockey job, because I got to do so many more things that I would have never gotten the opportunity to do if I had gotten the Magic job, just even if it's on a smaller level, right? Like I never would have been in charge of a budget, and I never would have been able to put together a media guide, and I never would have been able to put together a program. It just wouldn't have happened if I had gotten that Magic job. So the Solar Bears, the 4 years I spent with the Solar Bears really prepared me for whatever was next. It was easily the best thing that happened to me.
And you also had the advantage of working in hockey. And I've told anybody who will listen over the years, I've covered every major sport with the exception of the NFL. I've had no pro football experience, but every other major sport, I have been in the locker room or in the dressing room. And hockey players are by far the easiest, most gregarious, most agreeable. They'll do anything. And from a PR guy standpoint, especially a minor league hockey team, they were just happy to be there and have a job. And I can imagine that probably made that transition easier because you're dealing with hockey guys.
The hockey guys, you're right. I mean, I love a lot of the guys that have come through the years with the basketball side, but they don't hold a candle to the guys that I dealt with the Solar Bears. And again, it's a different level. It's a different animal. But you're right. Like they just, first of all, they were happy to be in Orlando because they weren't, right? I mean, you walked outside in January.
Not playing because they're not playing in Moose Jaw.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. They're not stuck in some frozen tundra where the population is in the hundreds. I mean, like they were in Orlando, Florida. They walked outside. They're wearing flip-flops to the rink. It really was a good time. Those guys were great a lot. And some of them went on to really, I mean, even bigger things in the NHL, whether it was in a coaching profession or a couple of guys did end up going to play, but the guys were just so great. And like you said, like, I asked them to do some really goofy things because you're trying to gain a little bit of attention for a minor league hockey team in Central Florida. Like you had to kind of go. I remember one time I asked a couple of guys, we were shooting a commercial and the idea was to take them to the Publix or grocery store in their full gear and just like smack stuff around in the aisles. And people had no idea, no idea what we were doing. And I would say I could probably count on one hand the amount of times in 4 years that somebody told me, no, I'm not doing that. Like it just was so easy. It really was. Those guys made it really easy and fun to come to work.
As you've been in the NBA for these 20 plus years, it used to be, there was a time period where most of the players that were drafted in the first round were from blue blood programs, and they were at least juniors or seniors. They'd had some experience. Shaquille was a junior when he came out. Now, lottery picks are quite often high school age kids or kids that played 1 year in school. How have you seen the athletes differ and change over the years as you deal with them as the gatekeeper? You got an 18-year-old kid versus a 22-year-old kid. It doesn't sound like a big difference, but is it?
It for sure is. There's definitely a maturity level with somebody that comes in, like you said, that's a little bit older and has gone through college a few years, as opposed to somebody that's coming in. I mean, we've had guys come in right out of high school, like a Dwight Howard. We've had guys come in now, most recently, where they've only been in school for 1 year. And there's definitely a difference between what you have to kind of deal with that athlete. It also depends on the guy and the player too, because I could take Paolo Banchero, for example, who only, he just turned 20 last year with us, but he came from such a highly regarded program in Duke, and some guys just get it, right? Like you've seen players that, you've dealt with where they understand, like they know what their role is. They know how to deal with things. And Paolo's a guy who's young and fairly inexperienced when it comes to life or anything like that, right? But he gets it. Like he got it right from the minute he walked through the door, and he's been a joy to work with. So I think a lot of it just depends on the guy and the situation that they're coming in from.
A lot's been said about what the Magic look for in terms of a player physically. And I'm wondering, in your experience, do they have a certain mental type that they look for, whether it's through the draft or if they're going to acquire somebody via trade or free agency? Is there a kind of mindset that this current basketball operations group desires?
I think so. And I think you can see it with the caliber of guys that come in. I would say, I mean, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've had a group of guys that, I mean, they get along so well, and they're all good guys, right? Like there's really not a bad apple in the bunch, which is rare because typically, you know, you always have one or two that are kind of a little off the beaten path a little bit, but these guys, and I think that does go with what maybe Jeff and John and that basketball operations group has looked for since they've been with Orlando. They really do look for the character of guy that they're going to bring in, and somebody that's willing to do the little things and willing to take a step back and willing to do what's, you know, it's rare when you get into pro sports to find guys that are all willing to kind of to sacrifice a little bit for the betterment of the group. Those are the teams that usually go a little further because they understand that there's a bigger picture in mind. And I think this management group does look for things like that when it comes to building the roster for sure.
I think the job that the coaching staff is doing right now is remarkable because when you haven't been winning for a long time, as the Magic haven't, you end up drafting high and you end up getting a lot of lottery picks on the same team. You got a whole bunch of guys that were all alphas. They're all the best guy in the history of their high school's program. And you're putting them on the same roster and you're telling them there's only 5 of you on the court at once. Someone's going to have to step back. And the coaching job to convey that message, to me, is just remarkable. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think Jamal and his staff, Jamal Mosley and his staff, do a fantastic job of getting guys to just kind of fit into their roles. And I think that it also, some of that comes with maturity of the guy, of the player. At some point, and I don't know when that clicks differently for everyone. At some point that does click with a player where, all right, I can't be, you know, I think everybody has visions when they get drafted, especially when they get drafted in the top 5, top 6, like that they're going to come in and be Kobe, right? That they're going to come in and take the league over and they're going to dominate and they're going to kick everybody's ass and they're going to score 25 points a game and it's going to be really easy. And for some guys, that takes a little longer to realize that that's not the case, that those guys are special, and you have to find where your role is and where your niche is going to be in the league. And that clicks in slower and faster for some guys. I think Jamal does a really good job of working with each player and kind of getting them into the right mindset of, listen, like this is, and it's different for every team, right? Like our team may need player X to just rebound. That's all we need him to do is go rebound. Whereas he could go on another team potentially and they need him to do more. So I think Jamal does a really good job of getting guys to buy in on what their role for our team and our success is going to be. He's really, and he's got a really good connection with all of these guys. And it's not just our players. He has an amazing connection with everybody he's dealt with ever in the NBA. The amount of guys that I see go up to him either before a game or after a game, give him a hug or you know, ask how his family's doing, this, that, and the other. It's more than I've ever seen with any other coach since I've been here. He really he's made a deep connection with a lot of players in the NBA, and that speaks a lot about who he is. When
you were talking about this current basketball operations group, it occurs to me that You've seen a lot of general managers and head coaches and assistant coaches
Yep.
in the 20 plus years that you've been there. And you talked about Ty Eastham, who's the television producer. He's been there almost as long. David Steele, the play-by-play announcer, I think was their first employee or second employee.
Yeah, he's
back
one
in
of them. Yeah.
1989. And you guys have just seen GM after GM and basketball ops group just churn through Orlando. How weird is that? That you guys are the constants. You're the ones that have historical references, and coaches are hired to be fired. You know that someday Jamal is not going to be the head coach. It's going to be somebody else at some point. Is that kind of an odd thing to ponder?
It is. It makes it. Yeah. I was going to try to come up with a creative sentence, but the answer is yes. Like it really does make it difficult because you definitely get close with, you're working with these guys day in, day out. You're with them 7 months out of the year. You're with them a lot more sometimes than you're with your own family. And so you get close with these guys. And when a coach gets fired, it's hard to not take it hard because, you've developed a friendship with those people and a closeness, and you hate to see them go. It is hard. It's definitely tough to watch guys that you've gone through a lot with and tried to help succeed, because at the end, if they're leaving, that probably the reason is that the team is failing, right? And you want these guys to succeed, because if the team is succeeding, everybody eats, right? We like to say everybody eats. Everybody's gonna be able to sit at the table and eat because the team is doing well. And when somebody gets fired, it definitely means that something has gone awry. So it's definitely hard. It's definitely tough to watch guys go.
Something that I've had a hard time explaining to people over the years, and I have not worked for a franchise for a long time, but when you do work for a team as opposed to for a league or for a broadcaster or what have you, when the team is winning, everything is better. Like you can't even describe what the energy is like in the building when things are going well. Mm-hmm. And then when the team is losing, there's nothing worse. Everyone's looking over their shoulder. Right. Everyone's wondering what's going to happen next. I wonder what it's like to be in the office with the Magic now being viewed as a team most definitely on the rise. I'm sure you can tell me what the win total increase was last year over the previous year. What's it like?
It was 12.
12. Okay. See, that's why I got the PR guy on the broadcast. So 12 wins better last year than the previous year. What is it like in the office? Is the attitude pretty positive?
Yes, I would say there's an energy this off season that there hasn't been in quite a while. I think our improvement last year, like you said, like we went from 20 wins to 32 wins, which I get it. 32 wins is still not great,
but that's a big deal.
It was the biggest jump in the Eastern Conference, right? And so, and that's not to say, okay, well, we won 12 more games this year. Now next year we're going to win 44. Like that's not the way this works. That, like everything's not linear. But that being said, I think now you do get stuck, in the years where I would say 3 years ago, even you do kind of like just look around and you're just like, holy crap, like what are we doing? You just want to see light at the end of the tunnel. You're fine with going through the doldrums as long as you can see some type of light. I think if you can see that, then everything's fine. We were in a pretty dark place.
And not too long ago. Yeah.
No, I mean, listen, like everybody acts like, well, this is what you wanted. Nobody wants to lose 60 out of your 80 games. Like nobody wants to do that. Right. Even if they say, well, you're quote unquote tanking, which, you're rebuilding this, that, whatever. Right. It's hard. Like it is hard to sit there and go in and then come out the other side and just be bruised, battered, and beaten. And so I would say this off season, there's definitely an energy that we haven't felt in a few years, and it's very refreshing. It's very exciting. I think the future definitely is bright for this team because you know what, Whit, like you can see a little bit of the light now. Like you can see, okay, you have Paolo Banchero as like maybe your alpha A, and you have Franz Wagner as a very, very high level second year pro, and you have Wendell Carter Jr. and you have Markelle Fultz, and you can start to see the way this is shaping up. And it's exciting, especially the way we finished the year, right? Like we had such a really tough start because we had all of these, you hate to use injuries as an excuse, but we had no guards at one point for about 15 games.
Right.
I mean, literally no guards. And so, to start 5-20 and you're like, good God, like here we go again. Like I didn't think we were going to be this bad. And it's because we weren't that bad. We just didn't have all the bullets in our gun. And then so finally, when we got a full roster, we were 500 for a good part of the last 50, 55 games of the year. And so that definitely, there's no reason to think that you can't do that again. And so it's definitely a different energy. And like you said, when you have been a part of this, winning is good and losing is bad. So, and I think everybody for the last 50 games, players, coaches, staff members, they got a taste of what it really could be like when we put it together. And when you do that, that's exciting. And we had some good wins last year too. I mean, we beat Boston 3 times. That's a team that everybody looked at as, the best of the best. We beat Golden State twice. Like, we were tough against Miami pretty much all year long. So when you look back, like things are looking in the right direction. We just hope that they stay that way.
On the personal side, away from work, I always remind my wife that I was on the air when she met me. So there's no excuse
That's
for
right.
her not to know what the schedule was. And you travel more than I do. And you've got younger kids than I do. You've got teens and preteens. How has that adjustment? How do you and your wife, Laura, sort of negotiate the amount of time that you spend on the road?
I mean, she has been a rock star we've been married now 21 years. I think it's 21. I better get that right. And
I'll edit that out if you're wrong.
It's 20 plus, Whit. It's 20 plus.
Okay.
You know how it goes when you have younger kids and then you're gone for a week, like that can be tough. I mean, my wife sometimes, has to operate as a single parent, and as much as you want to do from the road and as much support as you want to try to give, you just can't, right? Like you're on the road and you're kind of stuck. And it never fails. Somebody always gets sick as soon as you walk out the door. I mean,
100%.
as soon as you get on that plane,
yep,
you get a text or a phone call that says, "Oh, well, John's got mono, or Jim's got strep throat, or or Kate's got a running." It never stops. But she's amazing. Like she is definitely the reason that I can do this. She's been a rock for us, and just there's some stability at home, right? Like, which is so important for the kids to know that, like, my wife is always there. And so then when I come back, I mean, I really try, you have a lot of people that are just like, hey, let's go do this. Hey, let's go do that. And I just have to kind of remind people sometimes. And it's gotten easier as the kids have gotten older, right? Because the kids, you know how it goes with, like, they don't care as much.
They don't care as much. Exactly.
But like, especially when I was younger, or, when I was younger and they were younger, I really wanted to make sure that, like, when I was home. Because even sometimes during the season, when I'm home, I'm not. Because if we have 3 home games on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Saturday, like, those are days that I can't be home. Like, those are just nights I'm not home. Those, I tell them goodnight over the phone. Like, those are nights too, where even though I'm technically home, I'm not. And so I try as much as I can to maximize just the time that I have here, helping here, or doing what I can to be with them when we don't have a game. It's tough. And you know how it goes too. Like, I missed a lot of things early on, just being in this business, right? Like, even when I didn't have a wife and kids, and you know how it goes. Like, I missed weddings, I missed funerals, I've missed a lot of things for people that I consider really, really close to me, because I put the job first. You have to put the job first if you want to succeed. So I definitely feel like, and as you get older, you realize like you got to reprioritize a little bit to fit in the life stuff. But yeah, it's hard. I mean, it's definitely not easy. That's for sure.
People that don't travel for work view travel for work as being glamorous, and it's just not. And even when you travel like the NBA travels, which is on a chartered flight, a bus directly to a hotel, yeah, that's great. But you're going to bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, 9 times out of 10, and then waking up to go to shoot around by 9 o'clock the next morning. And is that the part at this age and stage that you'd kind of like to change the most? Is the travel aspect? Is that the hardest part of the job?
It is, and only because, and I mean, I guess it's because I'm old. I mean, I just turned 50, and so maybe that's part of it where you're just like, you didn't really. It's harder. It's harder to do. Like, it's just harder to wake up that next morning and roll out of bed and get to shoot around, and you do kind of like go through this part where you're like, what am I doing? Like this, at some point I gotta grow up and get a real job where I don't have to do any of this. But at the same time, you can look at the flip side of it and go, well, holy crap, this is what I get to do for my job. Like there's nothing better. Like this is what I wanted to do. I mean, ever since I made the decision to try to do it, 20, 30, almost 30 years. Well, it is 30 years ago at this point almost. And you do kind of have to kick yourself and my dad used to always say, like, listen, George, like, if I would ever complain, because it's hard to sympathize, like you said, with somebody that's flying on a charter jet, staying at 5-star hotels, sitting courtside at every NBA game, right? Like people would give their left arm and maybe their right arm to do it.
Right.
But just like every other job, like it's a job. And so every once in a while you find yourself complaining about this, that, or the other. And I would always complain to my dad, and my dad would let me get it out. And then he'd look at me and he'd say, like, he's like, jackass, like you could be breaking rock out there, right? Like, it's like, that was always his line. Like, he was always like, you could be out there breaking rock. You want to be one of those guys? And I'm like, no, not really. And he's like, then you should just go ahead and suck it up and be fine. He's like, I can't believe and so he would always kind of put things in perspective for me about, how lucky I am to do what I do.
In just a few seconds, we'll have some closing thoughts on this episode, so stay tuned. If you're enjoying it so far, please consider subscribing or sharing and leave a review. Let me know what you'd like to hear in the future on Media Credentials. The travel piece with George really hits home for me. It's hard to complain when you get to do what we do, but I do have the shared experience of missing a lot of stuff. When I was at ESPN and our son was a newborn, I worked almost exclusively nights and weekends, and some of our neighbors in Connecticut actually thought my wife was a single mom. I also enjoyed the conversation about the energy of a front office and how things ebb and flow with the team, which is something I really miss from working for the Magic all those many years ago. It doesn't matter what department you're in or how long you've been there. When the team succeeds, that is a rising tide that really does lift all boats. Or to put it another way, winning is good, losing is bad. Thanks again for listening to Media Credentials. For examples of my work, including video and audio clips, a blog, and my contact page, check out whitwatson.com.